Why don't we go ahead and call this meeting to order? Good morning. Welcome to the TRPA Legal Committee. It is Wednesday, February 22nd, and it is 8:55 a.m. The first item on the agenda is the roll call to determine quorum. Catherine, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Faustina?
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson? Here. Ms. Aldine?
Here.
Mr. Hicks?
Here.
Mr. Rice? And Ms. Williamson?
Here.
Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Just a few ground rules for the members of the public who are joining us remotely. To observe the meeting, go to trpa.gov under the calendar header, click on Governing Board Hybrid Meeting for February 22nd. There you will find the public meeting hosted on Zoom. To address the committee members directly with your comments, raise your hand in Zoom by clicking the raised hand button. With your hand raised, you will be unmuted by TRPA staff and have 3 minutes to address the committee. If you have used the dial-in numbers to join us by telephone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand and be unmuted. To remote committee members, if you wish to speak, please also raise your hand in Zoom or just try to get our attention. And everyone has their cameras on. Thank you. Okay, next is approval of the agenda. John, are there any changes to the agenda?
No change.
All right, thank you. With that, I'm looking for a motion to approve the agenda, I think, right? Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next, we're on to agenda item 2, which is election of vice chair. As a reminder to the public, after committee discussion on this item, you may raise your hand to be called on to share your comments. Right, committee members, do we have any questions, comments?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Shelley, would you be willing to vice chair the committee?
Wow, that's a loaded question. Yes, I would be happy to. Thank you.
Well, as we're distributing all the various committee chairs and vice chairs, we're trying to even out workload. I don't know if we're doing a good job of it.
That is wonderful. Thank you, Shelley.
You're welcome.
Are there any, we have an excellent nomination / question on the table. Any further discussion? Okay, public comment on this item. Catherine, are there any members of the public wishing to make a comment on this item?
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised to comment on this item.
Okay, thank you.
So would you like that to be a formal nomination?
I would love that to be a formal motion.
Okay, I nominate Shelley Aldine as vice chair of the legal committee.
Thank you. Let's see, any more discussion? And I think we need a roll call vote on this.
Ms. Faustinos?
Yes.
Mr. Rice?
Yes.
Ms. Gustafson?
Yes.
Ms. Aldine?
Yes.
Mr. Hicks?
Yes.
Ms. Williamson?
Yes, and thank you.
Madam Chair, that motion passes.
Wonderful. All right, we're now on to agenda item 3, which is approval of the minutes. We have a set of minutes from December 14th, 2022 on page 19. Does any member of the committee wish to make any changes to those minutes?
Madam Chair, I just had a couple of minor clerical corrections that I've submitted to Maria.
Wonderful, thank you. With those corrections, I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Moved.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Let's move on to agenda item 4, which is a briefing on updates to teleconferencing rules. This is for Mr. Marshall. John, could you please present?
Thank you. And I guess it's a good day to talk about teleconferencing since we had snow and have a fair number of board members participating remotely. We're going to talk about kind of open meeting law generally later in the day, but this item is specifically on teleconferencing because our standard practice during the COVID years will be coming to an end. And we wanted to brief you all and maybe have a discussion about where we might want to proceed in the future. So here's a little bit of refresher. Could we have the next slide, please? I don't know if you all, part of the slide is cut off for us with the pictures. Will that be? Yeah.
They're only seeing the slide.
They're only seeing the slide. Okay. You can, why don't we have, I'd rather have, is it all right if we And then for maybe the next slide, we can
Sure.
make them disappear. Okay, so this is Article 3D of the compact. And this directs the agency so that all meetings shall be open to the public to the extent required by the law of the state of California or the state of Nevada, whichever imposes the greater requirement applicable to local governments at the time such meeting is held. So let's unpack that a little bit. You'll notice first that all meetings shall be open to the public to the extent required by the law of the state of California and Nevada. It's not incorporating all the either Nevada OML or the state of California equivalent. It says all meetings shall be open to the public. So that's what we are kind of focusing on, not necessarily all the agenda requirements, which we have our own versions of in our rules of procedure. Then it says, I'm going to skip down a little bit, applicable to local government. So in Nevada, it's the Nevada Open Meeting Law, and in California, it's the Brown Act, as opposed to Bagley-Keene for all you state workers who might be familiar with Bagley-Keene versus the Brown Act. So we follow the Brown Act if we're following the local law in California. And then, because that's what's applicable to local governments. The imposition of the greater requirements, TRPA has historically followed the Nevada open meeting law because it has more restrictive provisions for when you can go into closed session. Otherwise, they're about the same. What we're going to see is that for teleconferencing, that might be a little different now. But what TRPA has done regarding teleconferencing is adopted its own rule, Article 2.16 of the Rules of Procedure. And we're going to go through that in just a second. Why don't we just go to the next slide? And this is a very, very generalized comparison of the Nevada open meeting law, the California Brown Act, and the TRPA rules of procedure regarding conferencing. So just why we're here basically is because the emergency declarations in both states, which allowed local governments to essentially work remotely during the pandemic, are coming to an end. And more specifically, the emergency declaration for the Brown Act exception in California is ending at the end of this month, unless something happens in the last couple of days of this month, but we don't anticipate anything happening. So what that means is that next month, we're moving back to our standard rules of procedure for remote meetings or remote participation in meetings. And you'll see that the left-hand column here is basically shorthand for different types of requirements that arise when you, under law, when you want to do, have members appear remotely. This doesn't apply to staff. It's just the public members of a public body. So let's just quickly go through these and I'll give a quick explanation and then we can kind of talk about where we may want to go next. Because if we don't proceed, or excuse me, next month we will be proceeding under Rule 2.16, which has some provisions that probably we would maybe be interested in changing out in the future. Okay, so let's first talk about the justification and approval required. This is for when can members, individual members, participate remotely. So under the Nevada open meeting law, there is no specific requirement as to a justification for the individual members. Under the California Brown Act, the new provisions of, I always get the number wrong, for 2449, I think it is, AB 2449. There's two different provisions. There's a just cause provision that allows individuals to appear remotely for just cause, which is things like a babysitting emergency, taking care of family members. And then there's an emergency basis, and that's doesn't really give criteria, but it is typically it has to be something probably more extreme than your just cause. So, for example, there's for pandemics. Now,
How about bad snow days?
I was gonna say
it
weather.
doesn't mention bad snow days.
Hmm.
And the other thing that's new about the Brown Act is for emergency purposes, approval is required for a member to appear remotely under the emergency provision of the Brown Act. So what this means is that you have to essentially make a small presentation to your fellow board members, and they then need to vote to allow the board member to appear remotely under the emergency conditions. Okay. All right, now let's go over to the third row, TRPA, and we have a hardship requirement. Hardship essentially is just cause and emergency and adverse road conditions. So under our rules of procedure, if it's unsafe to drive, that's a justification for a member to appear remotely. Now let's talk about the quorum requirements, because that kind of undermines perhaps some of the ability to do some of these things. So is a quorum in person required? So even though there may be some members remote, where does the quorum have to appear? And in Nevada, there's no requirement that the quorum be in person, i.e. physically present in the meeting room. In California, there is a requirement that a quorum has to be physically present. So only a minority of the board members can appear remotely. So for our case today, we probably wouldn't be able to do this under the Brown Act. Under our rules of procedure, a quorum needs to appear within the jurisdictions of the local agency. So what that means is you can appear remotely if you are in Placer County, El Dorado County, Washoe, Douglas, or if you're really lucky, Carson City. And so what, that was just a shout out to Shelley. See if she's aware.
Can I shout back?
President in one of those counties.
6.1, 6.3 says during the teleconference, a quorum of the members shall participate from within the Tahoe Basin. But that would preclude, for example, Wes participating from Douglas County in the Valley.
Correct.
So, but based on what you said, and based on what was on the screen, that wasn't my interpretation. If they're within the jurisdiction, which would include areas inside and outside of the basin.
You know, Shelley, I think you're right that this should have been a little more tight, that it's within the basin, within those jurisdictions. But I think the major point that I want to talk about here is when we come back around for discussion is, you know, do we want to do something about that quorum requirement, because it makes remote participation available only to a small minority, given where most people or a lot of our board members live outside of the basin, and particularly in winter conditions, commuting in is the big deal. So the next one is, and thank you, Shelley. The next one is the remote location open to the public, and are you required to have allowed public comment in the remote location? And under both the California Brown Act and the Nevada Open Meeting Law, the answer is no. Under Rule 2.16, the answer is yes. You have to the remote location has to be open to the public, and the members have to allow any public comment from commenters who happen to be present at that location. That used to be what the Brown Act required, but now with the new amendments, because of this next next couple things, they don't require that individual locations be open. Then the next one is remote posting of the agenda and materials. You don't have to do that under the Nevada Open Meeting Law or the Brown Act, but you have to do it under our rules of procedure. This is just more of a pain in the neck than anything really, but where it comes into where it kind of raises some concern is, posting something on the outside of your house potentially, and also then providing for materials that are handed out during the meeting. They're not just, so electronic provision may work here, but it's a little unclear. So the remote opportunity to comment, this is new for California. And this says that California local jurisdictions need to provide a call-in. So this is about equal access here. A call-in number, a web-based participation, and in-person, some in-person capability, all in real time. So they have to be able to participate meaningfully in the meeting under all three different, with all three different modes. Then the next one is a frequency restriction, and under Nevada and TRPA rules, there's no limit on the amount of opportunity or amount of times that a board member may appear remotely. Under California, there's two different limitations. There's a 2 times per year for the just cause, so you can only use it 2 times per year. And the maximum under either just cause or emergency is 3 times in a row. So you can't essentially not appear in person more than 3 times. Then there's a new in California is a required disclosure of persons in the room, in the remote location. In California, it's for 18 and over. You have to identify any person in the room 18 and over and what that person's relationship is to you. So that's to get at if, there's a concern that if members of the public are not allowed to access the remote location, that there's a disclosure of any potential people with conflicts of interest or have a specific interest, might be in the room. Catherine, would you mind scooching back just a little bit? Thank you. And then the last one is committees. Neither open meeting laws of California or Nevada distinguish committees. We do. There's fewer restrictions under our current rule. I won't go through them, but just know that there's more flexibility provided to committees, which we may want to look at for the full governing board. So what this means is there's one thing I want to touch on, and that if you go back and remember Article 3D, it says that we have to follow the stricter of the two. Mm-hmm. So what we did when we added the telecom provisions is essentially codify the prior Brown Act into our rules of procedure. So that allowed us to follow the Nevada open meeting law for everything else, because California was more strict than Nevada for remote participation. Now it's still more strict. And right now, the California Brown Act, in some provisions, are more strict than the rules of procedure, but on the other hand, are less strict regarding quorum and whether or not you're personal location is open to the public.
Mhm.
And the kind of discussion issue that I'd love to have with you all is, where would we like to go? And here's the different options that I see available to us. Okay. And just to get this off the table, we can't use the Nevada open meeting law. So either we've got to figure out something that suits our needs, but is in essence consistent with the Brown Act, or we follow the Brown Act. And that allows us, if we want to maintain the same compliance with the Nevada open meeting law. Otherwise, we would flip to having, we could just get rid of our rule 2.16 and just follow the Brown Act for all our requirements. But I think there may be a better middle ground here of looking at this and crafting a unique set of rules to us that allow us to satisfy with the Brown Act, satisfy the Brown Act, and still follow our usual procedure with the Nevada open meeting law. So here's my, I don't want to make this into a proposal, but here's a suggestion for discussion about, and I think the key things are, do we want to expand the just cause emergency provisions to allow hardship as we define it? And that would include road conditions and unsafe conditions, which also might be fire or other kinds of emergency. I think it ties to the emergency act requirements, but then if we were to go down and to do, just cause and, is there a need for a frequency restriction? And then finally, are you all comfortable with a required disclosure that we would, I think, need to put in there for other participants in that remote location? The kicker is going to be, the frequency restrictions. We probably need to be pretty close to the less than 3 times in a row. And then there's some rules for just cause and the frequency with which, and I've simplified this so there's a formula, but essentially for us, it's 2 times a year. So why don't I stop there, leave it open, or kick it all back to you, and then ultimately for public comment.
John, I have a question.
Yes.
And I hate, I mean, the objective obviously is to have sufficient people participating so that we don't have to cancel a meeting because of a lack of a quorum. I mean, I understand that we have chosen to adopt the stricter of the laws, whether it's in Nevada or California, but is it possible to apply these maximums to the California members of the TRPA governing board and exclude those who live in Nevada?
Nice try. But no, it doesn't.
I tried that before, Shelley, on a briefing.
Article 3D applies to everybody. And it's not just California and Nevada members. It's basically talking about the agency as a whole. So we can't make those distinctions between members. So, and it's not, also, I think the way that you initially phrased that, Shelley, it's not, we don't have the discretion not to follow the stricter of the two. We probably have some discretion in how we craft that. And in particular, if we come up with a rule of procedure that allows us to say, we're in essence meeting the Brown Act, and so we want to use the Nevada open meeting law for the remainder because it's more strict. That way we kind of get almost the stricter of the two combined, a little bit of an amalgam.
And I'll just throw out like another probably non-feasible option, and we'll work our way back to reasonable. Why can't we amend the compact to just follow the Nevada open meeting law so we don't have to worry about the California in-person requirements? How hard is it to amend the compact?
Well, maybe I might turn that over to Julie, but it's only been amended twice.
Okay,
One in 69 and three times. One in 69, then again in 1980, and more recently as part of the mechanism to keep the two states together within the compact.
okay,
So it is a difficult task. Your question might be, when the next time comes around that there's an amendment brewing, should
Could
we
we
try to
tackle this?
slip something in there regarding this? But I think you might find that the objectives of, trying to meet both states, there may be some friction in that decision if we're going to the state of California and saying, will you support us backing off of your requirements for open meeting laws?
I guess the compromise there is to follow a stricter set of rules for other parts of the open meeting law, right? I mean,
Correct.
but I hear you. I guess, I think the reason I say it, and I'd love to hear other committee members on this, I just think having this remote option has been a game changer in a good way. Weather, fire, I mean, I've been evacuated at these board meetings. I have been stuck in snowstorms at these board meetings. I have small children, family
Yeah.
obligations. And I think it's important to have all of these voices able to participate in any way, in my view, any way we can do that
So
is
how,
good.
yeah, and here's what I was thinking as a way to craft it if this would pass muster. So if we go with the justification approval, but we use the hardship and then allow, stay with the California Brown Act for just cause or 3 times in a row, but add more times for hardship. Is that because of the extreme situations we have, so that you could go to not to exceed half the year, 6 times a year or something? Is there a way to craft that meets the intent, but it understands our geography and
Yeah.
weather
Yeah.
and fire?
One of the things
Because
that,
all the other things you said would be just cause, but it could happen more than twice
That's
a year.
right. That's right.
yeah,
Great point.
there's, we have talked about this, the remote participation requirements in the past, and when it was debated originally, when it was adopted in I think about 2009 or so, 2011, 12. Is that there was an express policy of the board to try to get people
To the meetings.
in person together, since it only happens once a month.
Mhm.
And so I just wanted to make certain that policy gets articulated. I do think what you're suggesting is within, I think there's some flexibility there. I think for me, the two things that we need to be careful about is the 3 times in a row,
Mhm.
since that's express, which I think we can live with,
Mhm.
And then the max 2 times a year. When you read the Brown Act and you hear them talk about within the boundaries of the jurisdiction,
Mhm.
they're not contemplating an entity like TRPA that has members that come from significantly further away than the jurisdiction. And so that, I think we may be able to work with, maybe including some flexibility about that, given that difference from, recognizing that difference.
And so so then I think the question to the board would be, is it 4 times a year?
So then I would
Is it
propose.
6 times a year? I mean, because I do think there's value in getting together with staff face to face, and I think that should be our intent if you accept a board seat, but we do want that flexibility.
John,
I
is
mean,
there
that's just my,
of carving out an exception for TRPA at the California legislative level? Maybe I should direct it to Julie.
Madam Chair, may I jump in? I
Please,
wanted
yeah.
to share, thank you for the question, Julie Reagan, here, Shelley. I wanted to share just in my conversations yesterday in Sacramento, this is a very hot topic. And a lot of interest groups are engaged with members because California has a lot of commissions. I mean, think of
State
the
appointments.
Sierra Nevada Conservancy Board.
Yes.
We have a member of that board that participates. So there are many issues swirling around. And honestly, think about the opportunities for others that have difficulty getting to meetings in the last couple of years. There's a big advocacy arm of the disabled community that's really, their participation on boards has grown because of virtual opportunities. So they're engaging, and there's a few bills that are going through the legislature. So I wanted to offer an opportunity for us to engage if you all are interested in either a carve out or engaging so that our wishes of the board are harmonized within whatever legislative vehicle might flow into the next couple of months, since we're looking at the Brown Act. So either way, we'll track it. But I think if we get a sense of where the board is going with the provisions that John Marshall laid out, we can engage constructively to take care of our needs as well. Because if these kinds of issues originally weren't contemplated, but they have emerged with other constituencies within the state in recent years.
So let me just kind of distinguish a couple things. I mean, that's great input and great to hear. We will, and absent the board directing us not to, we will continue with remote participation for members of the public. We're not talking about here getting rid of that remote participation opportunities. So I think we see the value in expanding the people's ability to participate without having to come, members of the public to come physically to this location. This is really focusing on board member and their ability to appear remotely and so that's the kind of rules that we're talking about. So absent direction from the board, we would always satisfy the remote opportunity to comment section, because we have basically all these options presently, and we would continue to have
Right.
that.
Right. So the only thing on that is I don't like having to post the materials and the handouts. Why are we requiring that if no one else does?
Right, I think we can back off that.
The
and
remote
move-
posting of agendas and materials
Yeah,
for
but-
somebody participating remotely, if no one else
Right.
is requiring
I
it.
think though, the trade-off is that you're gonna have to do the disclosure push.
Right, right. And that's
And
fine.
that's required, right? That's California state law.
California state law.
Right,
Okay.
but it's one we feel comfortable.
When I'm babysitting my grandson, but he's
No,
not
Under
18.
18.
He's not
Oh, good.
18.
I don't have to.
You can have the whole daycare there.
We have, you know, Belinda, I think were you gonna comment or?
Well, I think the most significant thing for, people outside of the basin is that hardship issue in terms of, weather and other, factors that might prevent us from being there physically. I mean, even if, we fully intend to be there and fly up there, so you can't get over the hill. So to me, that's, I think, the most significant issue, and everything else I feel really comfortable with.
Belinda, do you feel like having some maximum number per year that we'd want to see board members in person, or, not use this exception would be good or problematic?
Yeah, I think having a maximum of 3 in a row is very reasonable. I don't have any problem with that at all. And I think it, just is something that encourages us all to be there as to the best of our ability. I mean, essentially, there could be, health issues. Yeah, right. Health issues that are a little extensive that might be an exception to that. That's the only thing I could think of that, might make sense. But again, that hopefully would happen very rarely.
Yeah, I was just trying to think about what, do we go to
So
6 times a year, we want them in person, or 4 times a year, we want them in person, and then backtrack to where, what is our culture? What do we want? And
yeah, there's actually a provision in the compact that talks about board members need to appear at meetings. And if they miss more than 3 in a row, they lose their seat.
That's in the compact.
That's in the compact. But that's not saying that's not remote participation. That's just missing meetings.
missing meetings, that's a
Right.
different, yeah.
Just to let you know that. Were there other comments? I know Jessica she's still on?
Yes, she is.
But maybe she doesn't want to
Wes?
comment, or Wes?
Well, my question is, seeing as how some of us, like Shelley and a couple of others here in Nevada, we are on so many commissions and boards that if it's possible to have a alternate come in your place, I would think that at least the specific political venue would at least be represented. Is there any room for that in the California Brown Act?
Yes, the California, it's not so much that's not so much a Brown Act question, Wes, as are alternates allowed? So TRPA allows.
Just my seat, right?
Oh,
Is the only
just-
one.
Well, there's a couple where the individual is named, and it's either the individual or the, and so most board members can appoint an alternate, some cannot. So that's something that we may, if we're in the realm of compact amendments, we can look at. But the other thing that's, I think, that's underlying that West is, and there's a distinction between hardship and convenience that I think, and convenience may not necessarily be a bad reason to not, to appear remotely if we want the widest rules possible. That's almost like what it is, how we've been practicing to date. But I think coming out of the emergency declarations, we're moving back into a world, at least in California, where a convenience does not allow you to participate remotely. It does in Nevada, right? There's no requirements on whether you can participate remotely. And so I think it would be I think we should maintain, if we want to get some of these things through, particularly, California, the carve out or exception or something, that we maintain the hardship provisions. But I'm not hearing a lot of people in favor of getting rid of that, unless.
No, I think we
Okay.
need to
I think
have
we-
the hardship provisions, and then the second one, the quorum in person within the jurisdictions, we needed to clarify that as well. Shouldn't it be anywhere within the local jurisdiction? So if you're in
Well-
Douglas County or you're in Placer County, or
I think,
for quorum?
yeah, I think for the quorum thing, we touched upon it a little bit. I think for the quorum issue, that the Brown Act's requirement that it be within the jurisdiction, we can work with that.
Yeah,
Because it's not recognizing, the fact that our jurisdiction is not
A single
and it's,
walled jurisdiction.
right,
and everyone
and that would
is
give us
not required to
flexibility.
be a
Yeah.
resident of that jurisdiction. So in most local governments, you have to be a resident of that local jurisdiction to participate on
Right,
that
right.
legislative body. We don't have that requirement. So we may want to, I think I'd feel comfortable exploring with the board where if you want to mimic both the California Brown Act and the quorum and, wait a minute, no, we'd be looking at,
Well, what I was thinking, this is my, perfect world. If you're a state representative, as long as you're in the state of Nevada, you're in that local jurisdiction. And-
interpret your, yeah. I mean,
And the
essentially-
locals, I have to be in Placer County, and I can be in Auburn and remote in, and you can still count me as a member of the
So,
quorum.
kind
I
of
don't
a-
know.
a
I'm trying to
modi-
be flexible.
A modified, yes,
Yeah.
okay.
I don't know if that makes sense, but that way Belinda can be anywhere in California. She's appointed by the state of California, and
It's your appointing authority.
yeah, that's your appointing authority, so.
What have you heard as a member of like?
I haven't.
Anything?
This is the
from-
best briefing I've had yet, so
Yeah.
I'm learning.
Okay, CTC.
Haven't had this
haven't had
briefing.
This question,
Uh-uh.
okay. We can't really follow Bagley Keen, so I need to,
Yeah,
we have some limitation there
So what if we wrote it to say the quorum, yeah.
within the
and
representative jurisdiction.
Within the
Right.
representative,
Okay,
Right.
that would be ideal, I think,
Very
because
elegant.
Well,
I don't know how anybody could deny that.
but John, let me ask a question. I mean, we all take, time off and go take a vacations. What if a person from Placer County is in Hawaii?
I have an alternate.
well,
Yeah, well,
no, remember, this is just the quorum.
the quorum.
So this is not saying that you're restricted to appear from anywhere.
It's just saying that a quorum must be,
A quorum.
Where does the quorum need to be located?
Mm-hmm.
And that really, I mean, the intent of that is to drive people together,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And that's the purpose. And how much do you want to relax that purpose?
Yeah.
And it also serves a public,
But because we have a
Disclosure.
dual majority on some of our votes, I was just trying to be as flexible here,
Yeah.
given the other additions that we have that are complicated.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, the
Which-
compact sets our quorum
Right.
right now at 4 members per state. So that's how we would look at the quorum,
Okay,
not a majority,
not a
not
majority.
an overall majority, but a majority of each state reps.
I certainly don't want to ding someone who's on vacation willing to spend their day at a board meeting. You want to appeal.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Or they take us all.
Right.
Better
solution.
I'm in for traveling.
Field
with.
tours.
Okay, how are we doing on timing here?
9:30.
Well, would that be too relaxed, John, if we propose that a quorum, the findings for the quorum are anywhere within?
No, let's work with that, and I want to put
Okay.
out some feelers and see what.
And then if you have to go back to the locals, at least the locals be with anywhere within their county.
Okay,
John, I have a question. I'm supportive of what Cindy is recommending. I'm wondering, rather than getting a legislative change, could this be submitted to the Attorney General of California for an opinion letter?
those are a pain in the butt to get, and they take a long time. And what it will do is it will force the question out of the AG, whether or not what we propose to adopt would be consistent with their view of that relatively strict provision within the compact. I wouldn't recommend it as a mode. I would recommend going through the state agencies and make certain that our state, agency partners are comfortable with what we're proposing on both sides, as opposed to seeking an opinion letter from one AG or the other.
And while we're on this topic, since we're looking at the 2.16, on 2.16.6, it says all votes taken at a teleconference meeting shall be by roll call. That's not what we've been doing on these kind of essential votes, like, adjourning. I mean, we do it by acclamation. So maybe that needs to be revised as well.
Okay,
I have a question for you, sir.
yep.
If we should choose to go our own way, I'm the real rebel here. Not. Anyway, what is the consequence if we violate the open meeting law or the Brown Act?
Probably the most severe, without getting into the criminal side of things, which I think has a whole other aspect to it, but it threatens the integrity of your decision making. So it can undermine code changes. It can potentially undermine project level decisions. God forbid it undermines, our raises. Any actions that the board might
Raise,
take.
you get the raise.
Yeah, it will be subject to reversal for not following the provisions within whichever is the most strict. So it's not something we want to, be super aggressive on, because the result is potentially nullifying board actions.
But there's no individual penalty.
The question that you pose is whether or not the individual liability provisions, particularly in the Nevada open meeting law, would apply and to you as individuals. I think there's very good arguments to say that those provisions are not incorporated within, there was no intent of the states to incorporate those provisions, nor there is any specific incorporation. There, I would argue that those provisions lie outside, those remedy provisions lie outside of what is incorporated within Article 3D of the compact. But I can't sit here and say, you are free from any potential liability for knowing actions. Because that's certainly the kicker when you get to, when there is that enforcement at in both states.
Interesting.
Maybe this is an unfair question, but historically, how many times has the agency not been able to take action on an item because of the want of a quorum due to inclement weather, due to extenuating circumstances? I mean, that's downside. We as an agency, need to take action on certain important issues. And if the only way to do that at times is to be a little bit more lenient with respect to the use of teleconferencing, and that to me is a worthy trade-off.
We can't do that in an ad hoc fashion. Either we are, unless we want to write some rule that talks about that, and I would probably recommend against doing that, as whether or not that's consistent with the stricter of the two state laws, because there is no opportunity to do that. You can't relax your quorum requirements, for example, or you can't, not have public comment just because a member needs to leave and you're going to lose your quorum or something like that. So you need to, we need to plan actively around that, and we do. We try to put action items first. We try to undertake other strategies to make sure we have the appropriate quorums present for the board to take action. Usually, remember the quorum and the voting requirements are in the compact. And so what you're really asking are about, when we have remote, let's say we have a quorum requirement that's that we can meet if we count people on the appearing remotely, but not in person.
Right.
And, if we have a rule that is consistent, sufficiently consistent with the Brown Act, then I think we're okay in doing that. But I want that, any discussion for that to occur when we adopt the rule regarding the quorum proceedings, not on an ad hoc case by case basis, because then that potentially leads to inconsistent applications of that and the threat of invalidation of that action, which I think is too risky for the benefit gained. We can either push it to the next meeting, or we can make sure that the quorum is present, I think, in ways that do not put the decision that is made at risk.
I'm not suggesting that we, take action on an item when we don't have a legal quorum. I'm just using that as a rationale for using a technology that wasn't available 20 years ago. Times are changing, and we need to adapt.
And I think that is evident in California's amendments to the Brown Act. It's obviously not as liberal in this instance as the Nevada open meeting law.
But it really is crafted, I think, for the local agencies. And for
Yeah.
public being able to show up and talk to their elected officials. It's not set up for necessarily the statewide and the
Yeah.
by-state
Yeah.
issues. So, I understand why because the Brown Act is the local governments.
Yeah.
Bagley Keene is the state government, which is more flexible than
It's more flex,
than
but
the Brown Act.
the problem is that's not which one the compact directs us
Right,
to
right.
follow.
Yeah,
And so maybe a potential
is to look at the
fix in
Bagley
the
Keene.
future is to say, which one applies to.
Yeah, just so
state
Bagley,
agencies.
the state has
Exactly.
less restrictions on themselves than they do on local governments. And
For that
so,
very reason, I think.
right.
I just want to push us
Yeah, so,
forward.
Yeah.
And so I think Julie and I have a good
and no
feel
more
for
posting.
discussions.
If we're remote, we don't have to post, right?
And
But we will disclose.
we'll be bringing an item back.
Thank you.
But in
Thank
the
you.
meantime, we're gonna follow rule of procedure 2.16.
Okay,
All right.
so let's change.
Is there any public comment on this item?
I would just direct members of the public to raise their hand if they would like to comment on agenda item 4. Madam Chair, there are no hands raised to comment on this item.
Thank you. Let's move on then. This was an informational only item to agenda item 5, which is closed session with council to discuss existing and potential litigation. Committee members and staff will move to a closed session. The main session will resume after the closed session is over. Remote committee members, please wait to be moved into the Zoom breakout room. And I need a motion to go into closed session.
So moved.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any opposed? Motion carries. Good to go? All right. Agenda item 6, I don't believe we need potential direction regarding agenda item 5, confirming that. Good deal. Thank you. Let's move on to agenda item 7, which is committee member comments. Any comments from committee members? Okay, hearing none, let's move on to agenda item 8, which is public interest comments. Our final item of this morning's meeting is public interest comments. If any member of the public wishes to speak at this time, please raise your hand on Zoom or by dialing *9. Catherine, anyone waiting to public comment?
Madam Chair, there are no hands raised to comment on this item.
All right, that moves us on to agenda item 9, which is adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Moved.
All in favor, please say aye.
Hi.
Anyone opposed that wants to hang out in legal? All right, we're adjourned. Thank you.